вокзал. Это не вокзал. Это вообще не вокзал. Мы непонятно где стоим, в камнях чисто. Это просто трэш. Боже, почему я здесь? Я хочу обратно в Москву. Что это за руины?
Something extraordinary is happening inside occupied Crimea right now, and the Russian government does not want you to see it. Putin promised the Russians who moved to Crimea a better life. Sunshine, sea views, a fresh start. Instead, they got blackouts, fuel rationing, and a one-way ticket out. The exodus is real, with thousands of cars jammed at the Kerch Bridge, whole families abandoning their homes, and even occupation officials quietly relocating their loved ones back to the mainland. And the people who believed Putin's promises are now realizing they were sold a lie. This isn't just a military setback, it's the collapse of an entire occupation. And the craziest part? Ukraine didn't need to invade. It just made Crimea a nightmare for occupiers.
Банки не работают, вообще ничего не работает. Воды тоже нет. По какой причине непонятно, плюс еще жара. Все стоит полностью.
We're going to break down exactly how they pulled it off and why the Russians are running out of time. Russian-speaking women and children, the very people Vladimir Putin claimed to be protecting when he seized the peninsula in 2014, have recorded a public video appeal directed straight at Putin himself. On camera, they confirm what Moscow has spent years denying. No drinkable water, no electricity, no medicines, and food prices so high that ordinary families can no longer afford to eat. This is not a Ukrainian report. These are Russian voices, on Russian soil, calling out a Russian president for failing them. And it gets worse from there. Alexander Gorny is a Russian businessman who moved to Crimea in 2014, right after the annexation, full of optimism about Russia's future on the peninsula. For years, he was one of the loudest pro-Kremlin voices in the region, publicly defending Moscow's administration of Crimea and predicting a prosperous future. In August 2026, Gorny recorded a public statement admitting that his own predictions are not coming true. The situation is several times worse than I predicted. When the optimists start telling the truth, the situation has already passed the point of no return. Gorny went further. Trust in Crimean head Aksionov and in federal authorities has completely collapsed. He described a peninsula where the unity narrative pushed by Russian state media is pure fiction, where residents are looking out only for themselves, where profiteers are selling fuel and generators at inflated roadside prices, and where microfinance organizations are thriving because people have lost jobs and income while marketplaces have gone dark and are not coming back up. Gorny's conclusion was stark. Everything will collapse at the end of September, or perhaps even sooner. He confirmed that people he knows personally are already leaving, buying apartments or taking long-term rentals in Moscow, Krasnodar, and Rostov. Not tourists cutting holidays short, residents, settlers, people who came to Crimea after 2014 specifically because they believed in Russia's future there. Now, they are leaving.
There is a 2,290 vehicle queue with a waiting time of more than 5 hours. And I've seen some suggestions amongst the Russian bloggers that maybe some people on those queue are actually driving to Krasnodar Krai to try and get some fuel there because there's none left.
But the civilian exodus is only one layer of what is happening. Underneath it, something far more significant is unfolding inside Crimea's military infrastructure. Admiral Sergei Pinchuk, commander of the Russian Black Sea Fleet and head of the Sevastopol territorial garrison, issued an urgent directive ordering all military units to submit evacuation lists for the families of fleet personnel and civilian employees by July 10th, marked with high priority status requiring immediate execution. This was the first documented instance of such family evacuation orders ever issued by the Sevastopol Command during the entire course of Russia's full-scale invasion. The scope of the directive was staggering. It covered the 4th Air Force and Air Defense Army, naval engineering divisions, ship repair yards, military recruitment offices, naval academies, the 1,472nd Naval Clinical Hospital, forensic laboratories, electric grid enterprises, and even the naval newspaper Flag Rodny. Russia was preparing to evacuate the newspaper before it admitted anything was wrong. The satellite images confirmed what the documents described. Planet Labs imagery from June 24th showed traffic jams stretching over 10 kilometers at the approaches to the Kerch Bridge, with approximately 1,500 vehicles queued from the checkpoint to the village of Ivanivka in the Kerch district. 3 forces were converging simultaneously into that single line of cars: fuel shortages that made staying impossible, power outages that made daily life unsustainable, and regular bridge suspensions triggered by Ukrainian naval drone threats and air defense activity. The largest regional fuel networks in Crimea, TES and ATAN, had already been directly hit by a wave of gas station closures, confirming the crisis had reached even the peninsula's best-resourced commercial operators. Ukrainian Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov predicted in June that occupied Crimea will soon become isolated.
Crimea is being isolated by drones, and it looks like, in the near future, Crimea will turn into an island.
The 10-kilometer traffic jam was the physical beginning of that prediction, becoming reality. Putin personally acknowledged the problem, publicly instructing his government and defense ministry to take measures to reduce to zero the consequences of Ukrainian attacks on infrastructure. That sentence is an admission. A presidential directive does not get issued for a problem that does not exist. Now, here is where the story becomes truly significant, because Ukraine did not close just one exit. It closed all of them, one by one, until there was nowhere left to go. Russia had anticipated the vulnerability of the Kerch Bridge long before 2026. In response, it spent over a year constructing an entirely new strategic rail network along the Sea of Azov through occupied Ukrainian territory, specifically designed to reduce dependency on the bridge as the sole supply corridor into Crimea. Russian engineers installed anti-drone nets over the trains on that route, which tells you exactly how confident they were about its security. Now, this is where Crimea's crisis starts hitting a whole new level. Before we reveal what happened next, hit that like button and subscribe to the Frontline Show. Trust us, you don't want to miss what comes next. On June 18, a Ukrainian strike destroyed the strategic railway bridge over the northern Crimean Canal near Rozdolny, collapsing the structure and forcing the occupation administration to completely suspend all passenger train services within Crimea. The backup rail route Russia had spent over a year building was eliminated in a single night. By late June, both the Kerch Bridge rail link and the new overland land corridor rail connections were simultaneously disrupted. All exodus traffic funneled onto the road lanes of the Kerch Bridge, the only remaining practical escape route from the peninsula, producing bumper-to-bumper gridlock as three populations tried to leave at once. And then came the revelation that reframes the entire campaign. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces commander Robert Madyar Brovdy made the strategy very clear in a somewhat blunt and sarcastic way. He confirmed that Ukraine is deliberately keeping the bridge intact as an escape route while simultaneously making life on the peninsula so unbearable through energy, water, fuel, and food crises that the civilian and military population has no choice but to use it to flee. Ukraine is not trying to destroy the bridge. Ukraine is trying to empty what is on the other side of it. The Kerch Bridge, once a $4 billion symbol of Crimea's permanent incorporation into Russia, the infrastructure Putin personally drove across to celebrate, has been transformed into a choke point of panic and exodus. The confidence it was built to project is gone. In its place, queues, checkpoints, suspended rail service, and the unending sound of people voting with their vehicles to leave. ISW confirmed the Crimean exodus has become a noticeable trend, with Russian tourists, local residents, military personnel, FSB officers, and occupation authority representatives all simultaneously fleeing the peninsula, collapsing the Kremlin's decade-long narrative of Crimea as a Russian paradise into what residents now describe as a zone of constant danger. Occupation authorities in Kerch and Feodosia received urgent orders to fully evacuate valuable documents and equipment by the end of July. Officials who previously had privileged access to government fuel suddenly fell ill and departed for Krasnodar Krai. Ukraine's Atesh partisan network concluded simply that Crimean collaborators understand very well that accountability for their actions is approaching and that Russian air defense will not save them. The 2026 tourist season, which the Kremlin relied upon for 12 years to project normalcy and signal the permanence of annexation, has been systematically destroyed. Over 1 million vacation bookings were canceled by June 30, according to the Association of Tour Operators of Russia, resulting in a massive loss of up to 25 billion rubles. The Artek Children's Camp, one of the most iconic Soviet institutions and a post 2014 symbol of Russian normalization in Crimea, was hastily evacuated, with thousands of children relocated to mainland Russia and as far as Siberia under the justification of ensuring public safety. A regional state of emergency was officially declared on June 26. Fuel rationing in Sevastopol dropped to as low as 20 liters per week. The peninsula that Putin called his pearl in the crown is now a territory. His own officials are quietly fleeing before the general population notices they are gone. Former Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Valery Zaluzhny, now Ukraine's ambassador to the United Kingdom, revealed that the Crimea remote isolation plan was developed as early as 2023, but that Western partners did not believe in its effectiveness at the time. The 10-kilometer traffic jams, the fuel rationing, the family evacuation orders, the children's camp closures, the street-level pleas to Putin on camera, all of it is the operational delivery of a plan that 3 years ago the West refused to believe could work. It is working. To understand why Crimea is collapsing from the inside out, you need to understand what Ukraine actually destroyed, because it was not the buildings that mattered most. It was the invisible systems keeping those buildings alive. Crimea's air defense network was once described as one of the densest concentrations of anti-aircraft firepower anywhere on the planet. Russia had spent years layering S-300 and S-400 systems across the peninsula, backed by Pantsir point defense batteries, creating what military planners called an impenetrable umbrella over the Black Sea. That umbrella is now in pieces, and the way Ukraine dismantled it reveals a level of strategic precision that caught Russia completely off guard. Ukraine did not try to destroy every missile launcher. It destroyed the radars instead. By targeting the guidance and illumination radar systems that give S-300 and S-400 batteries their eyes, Ukrainian drone units rendered entire air defense complexes blind without needing to touch a single missile tube. A launcher without a radar is just an expensive steel tube pointing at the sky. 4 multi-billion-dollar S-400 complexes and dozens of Pantsir point defense systems have been systematically eliminated across Crimea, with Russia unable to manufacture replacement systems fast enough under Western sanctions to fill the widening gaps. But radar destruction alone did not finish the job. Ukraine attacked the fuel supply at the same time. Ukrainian intelligence confirmed that Russian military commanders introduced strict fuel rationing for mobile air defense fire groups across Crimea, with crews being sent out with so little fuel that they have been forced to abandon their vehicles when the tanks run dry. Mobile batteries that should be repositioning constantly to avoid being targeted are now sitting stationary, waiting for fuel that is not coming, while Ukrainian drones map their locations with complete accuracy. The result is a triple structural failure occurring simultaneously. Interceptor missile stockpiles exhausted from defending against massive waves of inexpensive Ukrainian drones, fuel starvation, forcing mobile batteries to remain static, and systematic radar destruction, removing the guidance network that ties the entire system together. 3 failures compounding into one complete collapse. Commander Bravdi confirmed the dual purpose, explicitly stating that de-energizing stationary radars disrupts the air defense system protecting the sky. Every substation Ukraine destroys simultaneously collapses civilian infrastructure and blinds Russian military radar networks. 1 strike, 2 strategic consequences. And it is the collapse of that air defense umbrella that is the direct cause of everything the civilian population of Crimea is now living through. On August 20th, Ukrainian drones struck the Taman electrical substation in Krasnodar Krai, a facility located on Russian territory itself, not inside Crimea. This substation feeds the main undersea power bridge that supplies more than half of Crimea's electricity from the Russian mainland. In a single strike on Russian soil, Ukraine severed the peninsula's primary energy lifeline. The same night, jet-powered Ukrainian drones followed with strikes on the Tavryskaya thermal power plant, with residents in Simferopol recording over 15 explosions within 20 minutes. What followed was a total peninsula-wide blackout, simultaneously hitting Sevastopol, Jankoy, Simferopol, and Kerch at the same moment. The entire occupied peninsula went dark in a single night. Before the Taman strike, Crimea had been operating on a difficult but manageable rolling blackout schedule of 3 hours on, 3 hours off. That schedule is now gone. The occupation authorities formally admitted they cannot maintain even that level of service, and downgraded the entire peninsula to an emergency rationing system of 2 hours on, 6 hours off, leaving residents without electricity for 75% of every day. Between August 17 and 22 alone, Ukrainian drone forces destroyed 27 key electrical substations and power plants across occupied southern territories, with 15 of those directly inside Crimea, part of a cumulative total of 267 Russian energy facilities knocked out since the operation launched on July 1. Now consider what losing electricity for 18 hours a day actually means in practical terms inside a peninsula already under siege. Water pumping stations run on electricity. When the grid failed, water supply was completely cut off to 35 settlements across Crimea on August 16 alone. Civilians in northern Crimea reported having no running water for over 7 consecutive days, forced to queue for emergency water truck deliveries in 40 degrees Celsius August heat. One resident described the situation in a single sentence that requires no elaboration.
Феодосия, Крым, дневник социального предпринимателя. Света нет 20 дней, 19 с половиной. У меня дома. В цехе примерно столько же, но с перерывами на день-полтора. Вот сейчас, на данный момент, света нет в цехе уже 9 дней. Вода тонкой струйкой, жара 40 градусов, со всеми вытекающими. Сотовая связь отвратительная. С Wi-Fi я могу работать в 3 точках стабильно в городе, чем и занимаюсь.
Commercial refrigerators in grocery stores began failing within days of the prolonged blackouts, causing large-scale spoiling of perishable food at the exact moment that alternative supply logistics from Russia had already heavily degraded. The result was that basic food, the kind that requires refrigeration, dairy, meat, vegetables, fruit, began to physically disappear from local shelves in the middle of summer.
Если смотрите магазин Пут в Черноморском. Вообще нахрен. Никакой молочки, йогурт и молоко. Ни пельмени, ни черта вообще.
The food prices that remained tell their own story. Crimea's local annual inflation rate has reached 15.79%, nearly 3 times higher than Russia's national average. Compared to neighboring Krasnodar Krai on the Russian mainland, kefir now costs 167% more in Crimea, eggs 149% more, white bread 131% more, and gasoline 204% more annually. 1 year ago, in July 2025, Crimean prices were actually cheaper than mainland Russia. By July 2026, that relationship had completely reversed. The Kuban grocery run has become a mass survival mechanism. Notes: thousands of Crimean residents and small store owners are now regularly crossing the Kerch Bridge, specifically to bulk buy food in Russia's Kuban region, where prices are up to twice cheaper than inside Crimea, then bringing it back. The occupation administration attempted to impose a 5% maximum markup cap on essential goods to halt the price spiral. It failed to stop daily price increases. Over 400 catering and grocery businesses have permanently closed across the peninsula, unable to preserve food or operate electronic registers without reliable electricity. Property rental rates have collapsed between 30 and 50%, and flats that previously rented within days now sit empty for weeks. 398 restaurants, cafes, and catering establishments closed permanently in the first half of 2026 alone, a figure 42.1% higher than the same period the previous year. Around 1,500 apartment buildings in Yalta, Crimea, have been left without gas. With residents unable to cook at home, authorities have resorted to setting up outdoor communal kitchens where people can prepare hot meals. Russia responded to the crisis by allocating an emergency $56 million, equivalent to 5 billion rubles, in direct subsidies to support Crimea's collapsed tourism sector after over 1 million summer bookings were already canceled. At the same time, the Kremlin is spending millions of rubles daily transporting commercial fuel generators to the peninsula just to maintain the degraded 2 hours on, 6 hours off electricity rationing system.
Работают генераторы. Работают генераторы, потому что по-другому добыть свет нельзя.
Moscow is now paying to keep the lights on in Crimea for 2 hours out of every 8, and the cost is coming directly from a war budget already stretched to its limits. Then came the detail that reveals exactly how the Russian government views its own population on the peninsula. In Jankoy district, men seeking compensation payments for being without power and water for more than 48 hours were required to provide proof of military registration before receiving any state assistance. The requirement was also applied to women with medical training. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate concluded, Moscow is not genuinely concerned about the negative consequences for the local population. The priority remains ensuring the Russian military grouping is supplied with materiel and human resources. The Kremlin is using humanitarian aid as a military recruitment tool inside a territory it has spent 12 years claiming to protect. Occupation authorities have now begun formally warning elderly residents to leave Crimea and return to mainland Russia before winter arrives, because Ukrainian drones are actively patrolling and controlling land resupply corridors to the point where Russian resupply attempts continue to fail. The occupation administration has privately abandoned any expectation of stabilizing Crimea's infrastructure before the cold season begins. The Moscow Times summarized the transformation in terms that require no additional commentary. Crimea has gone from a prized geostrategic asset to a massive multi-billion-dollar economic drain, with the Kremlin's dream of a permanent showcase of Russian power officially dissolved. While Crimea's infrastructure collapses from within, Ukraine's strikes are no longer stopping at the peninsula's borders. The campaign has gone deeper into Russian territory than at any point in this war, and what it is hitting reveals exactly where the pressure is being applied next. On the night of August 21, Ukrainian drones struck the Lukoil Permneft Tyrg-Syntez oil refinery in Perm, a city located approximately 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, deep inside Russia's industrial heartland. Zelensky confirmed the attack personally, stating that, "We continue to use our long-range sanctions to return the consequences of the war to where it came from." In Bashkortostan's capital, Ufa, over 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine, 2 of 6 drones penetrated Russian air defenses, with one striking an oil refinery unit under maintenance and a second crashing directly into a residential apartment building, shattering upper-floor windows and injuring residents. Russia's own air defense, the system Putin spent decades building and promoting as invincible, is now failing to protect Russian cities that have never previously been touched by this war. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate confirmed the strategic endpoint, stating that genuine normalization of life in Crimea is only possible once the peninsula is fully liberated. That is not a political statement. It is an operational description of where this campaign is heading. Putin conquered Crimea in 2014 with flags, celebrations, and a personal drive across a $4 billion bridge he built to prove the annexation was permanent. If he loses it, the process will not look anything like that. It will look exactly like what is already happening. Families loading cars at a checkpoint, naval officers quietly filing evacuation lists. Crimea isn't the only place where Russia's grip has quietly started slipping either. While families were loading their cars to escape the peninsula, Ukrainian forces were pulling off something far bigger, just a few hundred kilometers north, and that's exactly the story we broke down in our last video. We showed you how Ukraine liberated 745 square kilometers and 26 settlements in a quiet counteroffensive that was off guard at the exact moment their own communications collapsed. If watching Crimea empty out felt like proof Russia is losing its grip, wait until you see how much ground it's actually losing on the battlefield itself. Go watch it next, because between a peninsula in freefall and a front line quietly collapsing behind it, the real scale of what Russia is up against becomes impossible to ignore. This is the Frontline Show, and this war is moving faster than almost anyone is prepared for. We'll see you in the next one.